I scored a 99 percentile score on the GMAT with 6 weeks of preparation. But the GMAT test format, scoring methodology, and my life circumstances have changed significantly since then. Several years later, I'm trying to get to a 99 percentile score on the GMAT once again, with a limited amount of time in my hands for GMAT Prep. The question is, can I achieve my goal with confidence and certainty and without relying on luck, given all the challenges on the way? Today is day 29 of my GMAT Prep, and I have been capturing every single minute of my GMAT Prep on video. If you are interested in my day-to-day progress or want to see targeted GMAT Prep advice applied to real and raw GMAT preparation, this is the series of videos that you're looking for. For today, my plan is to take a GMAT practice exam in line with my study plan. I will be taking the GMAT Focus Official Practice Exam 4 on MBA.com. Before I get into it, here are some quick learnings that I plan to apply today. First, I want to ensure that I mark answers against all questions on every section of the test. Second, I want to hit the ground running on the Data Insights section and the verbal section. Third, I want to use pens with thinner strokes for my scratch work. The plan for that is to simply rely on using a new pen that I have not used before. Besides applying those learnings, I'm also going to be testing a few additional changes. First, I will be using a whiteboard for my scratch work for all my practice exams here on. That is actually a non-negotiable requirement if you are planning to take the GMAT online. In my case, I don't have another choice but to take the GMAT online because of my personal circumstances. Note that today's practice exam is the first time that I will be using a whiteboard end-to-end. The only time I've used this whiteboard before is when I was using it on a practice set a couple of days back. So you are going to see me experiment with it for the first time in this video. The second change I'm going to make on the practice exam today has to do with the sequence in which I will take the different sections of the GMAT. I plan to take the quant section first, followed by verbal and then data insights. If you have been following me, you know that I experimented with taking the data insights section at the start on my last practice exam. My learning was that it was not the right sequence for me. Today, I'm just going to be experimenting with a different sequence to see how things play out. I do think that taking the data insights section at the end comes with an element of danger. That is because this is a section where velocity has been a major challenge for me. By taking that section at the end, I'm accepting the risk that I might be low on energy by the time I get to it, and that might impact my outcomes on the test. But as I've said before, the only way you can learn something is by experimenting, and this is an experiment I want to try out today. Alright, so that is all I had to share before I start my practice exam. Alright, so this is about 2.5 hours later. I just got done with the practice exam and I'm going to try to debrief a little bit differently than I've done in the past. Let me head straight into the scores, which you should see on the screen right now. As you can see on the 3 sections, I scored percentile scores of 94 percentile on quant, 99 percentile on verbal, and 94 percentile on data insights. My first reaction is I'm not super happy about my score on the quant section. I think I can easily do 99 percentile, but I also remember from my last practice exam that answering even one question wrong on the quant section seems to drop my percentile score to 94 percentile. I don't know at this point if I answered one question incorrectly or more than that. We'll have to find that out on the next screen. With verbal, I continue to be surprised that I've been doing all right from a percentile score standpoint. Depending on which of my past videos you have seen, you may or may not realize that my scores on the verbal section have been relatively inconsistent. What I mean by that is that my percentile score on the verbal section has oscillated in a pretty wide range, somewhere between the 70s and the 90s, as you can see. So even though my score on the verbal section looks good as per this performance, I am not ready for it yet. For me, being ready would imply that my scores have reached a point of consistency across all the 3 sections of the GMAT. Talking about the data insights section, I continue to struggle with velocity there. I did see a slight improvement in velocity there. I was able to get through 18 questions with a good degree of confidence within the allocated time. There were a few questions where I think I invested too much time and dragged my feet, but overall there is definitely scope for further improvement on this part. What I did well high level is marking my answers against all the questions on the GMAT. 2 callouts on that point. On the quant section, while I had sufficient time to solve every question, I was not able to arrive at a clean solution on the last question before I ran out of time. So while I did mark an answer, I was not 100% confident on the answer I had chosen. That last question may or may not have been the reason why my score dropped to the 94th percentile. We will find that out shortly. On the Data Insights section, I arbitrarily selected answers against the last two questions, but in addition to that, there was at least one question I recall clearly. I think it was question number 16, where I just made a random guess because I couldn't arrive at a clean solution. There are two other points that come to mind. First, during the exam, I think it was somewhere in the middle of the verbal section, I had begun having trouble with my contact lenses. I usually do prefer to wear contact lenses over eyeglasses, but that is something that I would need to manage more actively going forward. Another thing that I struggled with just for a few seconds was trying to make a new pen work. You'll actually see that on video too, because there was a time during the exam where I opened a new pen and I started to write on the whiteboard with it, but it was hardly leaving any strokes on the whiteboard. I tried to persist with it for a few seconds before giving up and going back to the pen that I was using before that. Again, this is a minor issue, but you've probably experienced this with new pens yourself. Running into issues like this are a waste of precious seconds on the GMAT, and you want to do everything possible to avoid such wastage of time. With that said, let's go into the next screens and look at some of my section-wise performance metrics. Well, on the quant section, it looks like my instinct was correct. As you can see, it is the last question that I struggled a bunch on. I spent 5 minutes on that question and I still answered it incorrectly. Going by my experience with this practice exam as well as the last one, it looks like I need to do my best to answer all the quant questions correctly. That is because even answering one question incorrectly seems to be dropping my percentile scores to the 94th percentile. On the verbal section, it looks like I answered 2 questions incorrectly, but even with that, I was able to get a 99th percentile score. By the looks of it, both the questions I answered wrong were critical reasoning questions. I don't want to read too much into it at this point because I haven't invested much time into preparing for the verbal section yet. On a different day and on a different practice exam, it might very well be the case that I end up answering reading comprehension questions incorrectly. On the Data Insights section, I seem to have answered 5 questions incorrectly. I'm not surprised that I answered the last 2 questions wrong because these are questions I just made arbitrary guesses on. You can see that from the amount of time that I spent on these questions. Looking at the other questions I answered incorrectly, I seem to have answered 2 two-part analysis and 1 data sufficiency question wrong. I'm not surprised about question 16 either because I recall struggling a lot with that one. At this point of time, I will just stick to my rule of not reattempting practice exam questions that I answer incorrectly unless I'm in the final week of GMAT preparation. I'm still at least 2.5 weeks away from my final GMAT exam. So at this point of time, I'm just going to do my best to erase from my memory all the questions that I attempted today. That way I can use this practice exam again in a few weeks' time, and I will be ensuring to some degree that the questions surprise me as much as the questions on the final GMAT test would. Outside of all of that, there are 2 points that I want to call your attention to. First, I continue to struggle with the dry erase marker that I'm using. I was making this point before the start of my practice exam. Even though I started using a new pen at the start of the practice exam, I found that the tip of the pen did begin to deteriorate as I progressed through the test. As a result, the strokes were much thicker than I would like, and that made it harder for me to manage space on my scratch pad. I don't think I have an alternative at this point of time, so I'm going to just continue with it. And in a week's time or so, when I find some time, I will try to once again conduct an online search to find a better alternative if I can. Secondly, I think I did much better today on the Data Insights section, specifically from the perspective of hitting the ground running. The outcome may not be obvious to you from your score, but it is obvious to me based on how I was feeling as I was progressing through the section. That said, I do have some ideas for continued improvement on velocity as far as the Data Insights section is concerned. So I will continue to pursue those ideas and experiment with them going forward. Alright, so that is it for this study session. Because it is a Sunday, I will now take a quick break and I might return to my desk for another study session later today. Remember to hit like, subscribe and bell. Click on the Ask Me Anything link if you have any questions for me, and type something in the comments if you feel like it, such as some feedback you might have for me or some poem that you want to share with the world. I will see you in the next video.